In an age where every moment can be captured, shared, and forgotten in seconds, one man turned the internet into his stage and a horrific act into his legacy. A promising student vanished without a trace. A chilling video appeared online, and a name, once unknown, became synonymous with the darkest corners of the digital world. From the quiet streets of Montreal to an international manhunt that spanned continents, this is the story of Jun Lin, a young man chasing a new beginning, and Luka Magnotta, a man consumed by his own reflection, driven by a desperate hunger for attention and control. What began as a fleeting online connection would unravel into one of the most disturbing crimes of the modern era, a tale of obsession, illusion, and the terrifying intersection between fame and depravity. This is not just a true crime story about a horrific crime. It's a story about how far someone will go to be seen. He was known to many as Jun Lin, or Justin, as friends affectionately called him. Born on December 30th, 1978, in the bustling city of Wuhan, China, Jun carried with him a quiet determination and a hopeful vision for a new life. In 2010, that dream led him across oceans to Montreal, Canada, where opportunity and reinvention awaited. He enrolled at Concordia University, dedicating himself to the study of computer engineering, a field that suited his calm, analytical nature. By July 2011, Jun had found his footing. Classes, friendships, and the rhythm of student life gave him purpose. In May 2012, he moved into a small apartment in the Griffintown district, eager to write a new chapter of independence. Yet beneath the surface, Jun carried private truths. He had once been married to a woman, but his heart had long belonged elsewhere. To his family in China, his orientation remained unspoken. Not from shame, but from the hope of avoiding their disappointment. In Canada, he lived more freely, but the quiet tension between who he was and who he was expected to be weighed heavily on him. In the weeks before his death, Jun's relationship with his partner had ended under family pressure to settle down and marry. In his solitude, he turned to online spaces like Grindr, seeking connection and companionship. On the night of May 24, 2012, Jun Lin walked into an apartment building in Western Montreal. He could not have known that this meeting would change everything. Jun's boyfriend would later say that their relationship was never about control or danger. The darkness that followed belonged to someone else entirely, a man whose name the world would soon come to know. He was born Eric Clinton Kirk Newman on July 24, 1982, in Scarborough, Ontario, a boy whose life would be marked by reinvention and unraveling. Years later, in 2006, he would legally abandon that name, choosing instead to call himself Luka Rocco Magnotta, a name meant to symbolize a new beginning, though it would come to represent something far darker. Those who knew him in childhood remembered an unstable home. Young parents, their struggles visible even to neighbors. His early years were marked by isolation. He did not attend school until 6th grade, and by his teens, he had begun to experience inner turmoil he could not silence. When his parents divorced in 1994, the fragile balance in his world began to collapse. By his teenage years, he had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia after reporting that unseen voices followed him. School soon faded into the background, replaced by hospital stays and psychiatric care. By 1999, he was living in a group home. As an adult, Luka survived on disability support, supplementing it through escort work and sporadic appearances in adult entertainment under various aliases. He appeared briefly in magazines and even entered small reality shows, each effort a new attempt to become someone or something else. Plastic surgery, screen tests, photo shoots, all pieces of a self he seemed desperate to construct. In 2008, he auditioned for a television show about cosmetic transformation, hoping to perfect the reflection staring back at him. But Luka's reinvention extended beyond the mirror. Online, he became a ghost in countless forms. Police would later discover he had created dozens of Facebook profiles and more than 20 websites, each presenting a different version of himself. Model, celebrity, victim, prodigy. Sometimes he spread lies about his own life only to deny them later, orchestrating a cycle of attention and sympathy. By 2005, he had already been convicted of fraud and impersonation after taking advantage of a vulnerable woman, a crime that earned him a conditional sentence and probation. Even then, the court noted his mental health struggles and failure to stay consistent with treatment. In 2007, his name appeared again in headlines, this time linked to a notorious rumor claiming he was involved with Karla Homolka, one of Canada's most infamous criminals. He denied it publicly, yet the attention seemed to feed him. Soon, the digital world became both his stage and his shadow. By 2010, disturbing videos began to surface online, clips depicting acts of cruelty towards animals. Investigators and online communities traced the videos to Luka, who at the time denied all involvement. Eventually, in 2011, an email surfaced in which he admitted responsibility, a quiet confession paired with a chilling hint that the violence might escalate. The warnings were there, the patterns visible, and yet no one could have predicted how far the illusion would go, or how soon his fabricated fame would twist into something irreversible. On the evening of May 24, 2012, Jun Lin's life followed what must have seemed a familiar rhythm. Text messages, casual plans, perhaps the hope of a new connection. Around 9 p.m., his friends received a final message from his phone. No one knew it would be the last. When he failed to appear for work the next day, his employer grew concerned. Calls went unanswered. Days later, on May 27th, 3 of Jun's friends entered his apartment, hoping to find him safe. What they found instead was silence, a growing unease that pushed them to contact police. By May 29th, Jun Lin was officially reported missing. Surveillance footage would later reveal the final hours he was seen alive. The cameras caught him and Luka Magnotta entering the front doors of Magnotta's apartment building that same night. It was 10:20 p.m. Jun wore a yellow t-shirt, light shorts, and a baseball cap. Magnotta followed behind, holding the door open. To the lens of the security camera, it was an ordinary moment. 2 men stepping into an apartment building. But within hours, one of them would never leave again. At 2:06 a.m., the same cameras captured Magnotta walking down the hall towards the exit. He was now wearing what appeared to be the same yellow shirt Jun had on earlier that night. He stepped outside for 7 minutes, then returned, pausing briefly in the lobby mirrors, admiring his reflection as if rehearsing for an audience only he could see. Then, he turned and disappeared back down the corridor. Later footage would show him again, this time wearing a baseball cap strikingly similar to Jun's. Magnotta would claim later that the two had met for a Craigslist posting, an invitation framed around bondage and control. Whatever the truth, only one side of the story survived that night. Investigators would eventually find a garbage bag near the dumpster, latex gloves, electronics and discarded clothing, and among them, a pizza receipt dated the evening after Jun's death. The timestamp placed a pizza delivery at 6:30 p.m. on May 25th, matching footage of a delivery driver entering the building at that exact hour. Nearly 4 hours later, at 10:25 p.m., the cameras caught Magnotta again, this time struggling with a large suitcase, dragging it roughly down the steps and out the front door. 2 minutes later, he reappeared, empty-handed. It was the last trace of Jun Lin leaving that building, not as the person who had entered full of life, but as the beginning of a story that would horrify an entire nation. By the morning of May 25, 2012, the darkness that had begun behind closed doors found its way online. An 11-minute video surfaced on a shock site called bestgore.com, uploaded under the title, "One Lunatic, One Ice Pick." What appeared on screen would soon be recognized as the aftermath of Jun Lin's final hours. The footage showed a motionless figure, a bed frame, and acts of desecration too disturbing to comprehend. The opening moments of the video appeared to show a restrained man in distress, with another figure, wearing a hooded sweatshirt, positioned over him. However, Investigators later confirmed that the individual seen in the opening moments of the video was not Jun Lin, but another man who had previously visited Magnotta's apartment on an earlier occasion and had left unharmed. Investigators would later confirm that Jun had already been deceased before the camera began to record, his life taken earlier, off-screen. Magnotta had actually pieced together the video to make it look as though it was all the same footage. In the days that followed, details emerged, suggesting the production had been planned in advance. Online postings promoting the video had appeared 10 days before the crime, hinting at what was to come. Luka Magnotta himself had sent the footage to the website's administrators, ensuring that it would be shared and seen, the culmination of his long pursuit of infamy. Viewers who stumbled upon the video tried to alert authorities. One attorney in Montana reached out to police in both the United States and Canada, warning that the footage was real. Others did the same. Then, a new horror began. On May 29th, a blood-stained package arrived at the national headquarters of Canada's Conservative Party. Inside was a human foot, wrapped and marked with a red heart symbol. Hours later, another parcel was intercepted at a postal facility, this one addressed to the Liberal Party, containing a hand. Accompanying the packages were handwritten notes, taunting and cryptic, hinting that more body parts had been sent and that more violence could follow. The author promised 6 packages in total. Over the next week, 2 more boxes surfaced, one at St. George's School, another at Falls Creek Elementary in Vancouver. Some were wrapped in pink tissue paper, and one carried a chilling rhyme. In the letters, Luka Magnotta addressed Canada's Prime Minister and his wife, using her maiden name, leaving messages filled with bitterness and accusation. None of the parcels bore his true name. Each carried a different alias and false address, as though he was still hiding behind the digital masks he had crafted for years. Then, silence. For weeks, investigators searched for the missing remains. It wasn't until July 1st, 2012, that the final piece was found. Jun Lin's head, recovered beside a small lake in Montreal's Angrignon Park after an anonymous tip. It began with a suitcase. In the Snowden neighborhood of Montreal, a janitor making his morning rounds noticed a suitcase that hadn't been taken of the rest of the garbage. It was heavy, left beside a pile of overflowing garbage in the alley behind an apartment building. He'd first seen it days earlier, on May 25th, but the trash collectors hadn't managed to remove everything that day. Now, an odor was seeping through the heat. When he unzipped the case, a truth came out in a rush. A decomposing torso, packed and abandoned among the refuse of everyday life. Police quickly sealed off the area. As they sifted through the alley, they uncovered more evidence: bloody clothing, scattered papers, and both sharp and blunt objects. Among the items was a piece of paper bearing the name Luka Rocco Magnotta and a date of birth, a clue that would soon reshape the entire investigation. Surveillance footage from the building's security cameras filled in more of the picture. The recording showed a man hauling multiple garbage bags out of the apartment over several trips. The figure in the footage matched the same man seen mailing parcels at the post office, the same man investigators now sought for ending Lin's life. At first, detectives working the case believed the torso might belong to Magnotta himself, but that theory quickly collapsed when more evidence emerged. The timestamp on the security footage was unmistakable. 10:14 a.m., May 25th. The exact morning the suitcase had been dragged to the curb. By the time investigators entered apartment 208 on May 29th, the scene inside told its own story. Traces of what had happened there lingered in plain sight. Although there was an attempt to clean up, forensic teams found blood on the mattress, the refrigerator door, the kitchen table, and along the edges of the bathtub, and inside a closet scrawled in red ink were the words, "If you don't like the reflection, don't look in the mirror. I don't care." Days later, the analysis confirmed what investigators had begun to suspect. Jun Lin's DNA was found throughout the apartment. The suitcase had told them where to start. The apartment, rent paid through June 1st, revealed what had been done. Investigators reviewing the disturbing video that had surfaced online began connecting the dots. An officer recognized several items visible in the footage: a Casablanca movie poster and an empty wine bottle. The same object she had seen among the evidence pulled from the apartment's garbage pile. The building manager confirmed the identity beyond doubt. Luka Rocco Magnotta. An international arrest warrant was issued. Meanwhile, the animal rights organization Last Chance for Animals joined the hunt, using unconventional tactics to draw Magnotta out of hiding. They released videos falsely suggesting his involvement in the unsolved death and decapitation of Hervé Medellin in Los Angeles, a fabrication meant to lure him into revealing his location. At the same time, they offered a $7,500 reward for information leading to his capture, playing their own dangerous game in pursuit of justice. The case that had begun as a disappearance had become something far larger, a crime that blurred the line between performance and reality, between delusion and deliberate evil. And for the first time, the world knew the name Luka Magnotta. In the early hours after Jun Lin's death, Luka Magnotta began planning his escape. By the time investigators were piecing together what happened in his Montreal apartment, he had already booked a flight to Paris, using his own passport and real name. The ticket was purchased on May 25, 2012, barely hours after the killing. Magnotta landed in France and checked into a small hotel just outside Paris. When police traced his cell phone signal to the location, they arrived too late. He was already gone. At the hotel, he used a fake passport, registered under the name Kirk Trammell, and carried himself with a calm, deliberate confidence. Detectives soon learned he had contacts in Paris from a previous visit in 2010. They followed leads that pointed to a large-framed man who had been seen with Magnotta, and to another acquaintance who later told police he had let Magnotta stay in his apartment for 2 nights, unaware that his guest was the subject of an international manhunt. When the pressure in Paris grew, Magnotta slipped away again, boarding a Eurolines bus bound for Berlin, Germany. In Berlin, Magnotta lived as though the world wasn't searching for him. He spent several days partying with a man named Frank Rubert, whom he'd met online, moving between clubs and internet cafes. But by then, his name and face had spread across every major news outlet. Interpol had issued a red notice, making Magnotta one of the most wanted men in the world. On June 4, 2012, after nearly 10 days on the run, Berlin police located Magnotta at an internet cafe. He was seated quietly at a computer, reading news stories about himself. Both the cafe clerk and his companion, Frank Rubert, recognized his face from the front page of a newspaper. The cafe clerk then alerted the police. When officers arrived, Magnotta attempted to give them false names, before finally conceding, "You got me." Fingerprint analysis confirmed his identity. He appeared in a Berlin court the following day, on June 5, 2012, and did not contest extradition. German authorities ruled there was enough evidence to keep him in custody, and agreed to a simplified extradition process. 2 weeks later, on June 18, 2012, Luka Magnotta was handed over to Canadian authorities and flown back to Montreal. Upon arrival, he was placed in solitary confinement, his international flight from justice finally over. After his extradition to Canada, Luka Magnotta's case moved swiftly into the courts. On June 19, 2012, he made his first appearance via video link, entering a plea of not guilty to all charges through his lawyer. 2 days later, on June 21st, Magnotta appeared in person in a high-security Montreal courtroom, formally requesting that his trial be decided by jury. By April 12, 2013, he was indicted. When proceedings began, Magnotta admitted to the acts themselves, the taking of Lin's life, the dismemberment, the mailing of body parts, but maintained his plea of not guilty. His defense was built around one central argument, that he was not criminally responsible due to severe mental illness. Magnotta's legal team asserted that he had been in a psychotic state during the events of May 2012, unable to distinguish reality from delusion. Defense experts argued he suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, first diagnosed in his teenage years, along with histrionic personality disorder, borderline personality traits, and paraphilia not otherwise specified. Dr. Joel Watts, a forensic psychiatrist called by the defense, testified that Magnotta's symptoms were episodic and unpredictable, producing periods of detachment and distorted thinking. Prosecutors rejected the insanity defense outright. They portrayed the killing as meticulous and premeditated, the work of a man who was, in their words, purposeful, mindful, ultra-organized and ultimately responsible for his actions. They argued that Magnotta's online trail, travel plans and efforts to film and distribute the video proved a clear understanding of his deeds and their consequences. During psychiatric interviews, Magnotta told doctors that a man named Manny, whom he described as an abusive client from his escort work, had been present the night of the crime, pressuring him to take Lin's life. Investigators later found no evidence of such a person. Instead, the names Manny and Trammell were traced to fictional characters from the film Basic Instinct. Catherine Trammell, played by Sharon Stone, and her fiancé Manny Vasquez, both elements Magnotta appeared to have adopted into his own invented mythology. The Crown's psychiatric expert countered that Magnotta's symptoms were not the result of schizophrenia, but rather of borderline personality disorder compounded by substance use during his adolescence, which had produced behaviors that only mimicked psychosis. Throughout the proceedings, Magnotta chose not to testify, leaving his defense to be carried by expert witnesses and the disturbing trail of evidence left in his wake. The trial of Luka Magnotta stretched on for 10 tense weeks, a slow, meticulous unspooling of evidence, testimony and psychiatric analysis. In December 2014, after 8 days of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom with their decision: guilty on all counts. A charge carrying a mandatory life sentence with no eligibility for parole for 25 years. This means Magnotta will be eligible for day parole in June 2034 and full parole in June 2037, though the weight of his conviction ensures that freedom, if it ever comes, will arrive under the shadow of his past. When the verdict was read, the courtroom fell silent. The prosecutor then rose and read a statement from Jun Lin's father, written on behalf of his grieving family. In one night, we lost a lifetime of hope. Our futures, parts of our past, the statement said. We do not want to tell our story because it is too sad to repeat. The words hung in the air. Her father's sorrow crystallized into something unshakable as the courtroom absorbed the enormity of what had been lost. After the verdict was read and the courtroom emptied, Luka Magnotta began serving his life sentence inside the maximum security prison in Port-Cartier, Quebec, a stark and isolated facility reserved for Canada's most notorious offenders. For a time, the world went quiet around him. But 7 months later, in July 2015, Magnotta's name reappeared, this time through a personal ad posted on a website designed to connect inmates with pen pals and potential partners. In the post, he described himself as seeking a Prince Charming. Weeks later, the ad vanished after the site's creator received a letter from Magnotta, who claimed he had already found what he was looking for. 2 years after that, reports surfaced that Magnotta planned to marry another inmate from New Brunswick, though the nature of their confinement meant their union would exist only in letters. In 2018, Magnotta's name surfaced again, this time for a book titled My Son, the Killer, co-authored by his mother, Anna Yorkin, and writer Brian Whitney. Within its pages, Magnotta spoke publicly for the first time since his conviction. He expressed regret over his defense strategy, claiming he never supported the plea that portrayed him as mentally unfit. It's very annoying, he said. I never wanted anything to do with the NCR defense. I have no mental illness whatsoever. I had to go with it, even though I didn't want to. My lawyers pressured me into it. Years passed. Then, in 2022, Magnotta was quietly transferred from the high walls of Port-Cartier to the medium-security La Macaza institution, a move that reignited debate over whether a man capable of such horror should ever know anything resembling comfort again. Today, he remains there, a figure frozen in infamy, while the world he once sought to shock has long since moved on, still haunted by the echoes of his choices and the life he took. What began as a single, senseless act of violence had now spiraled into an international reckoning, one that forced the world to confront the dark intersection of fame, obsession, and cruelty in the digital age. If you found this video intriguing, we invite you to keep watching. Discover the next case that reveals how obsession and deception intertwine in the darkest corners of the human mind. Just click the video on your screen We'll meet you over there.